This will be for the Kuta software worksheet, inverse trigonometric ratios. Okay, they want us to find each angle measurement to the nearest degree. Okay, so we'll probably have to round off. All right, let's look at number 1. This right here is the sine function. Okay, and this letter B represents the angle. So we're taking the sine of the angle B. And basically we have to work backwards. They're giving us the sine of the angle B is 0.4848, and we basically have to solve for B. Now this whole thing right here, sine of B, is one number. Okay, so you can't just divide both sides by sine. All right, this whole thing is one number. So the opposite of sine, the way to get sine to cancel, is to take the inverse sine of both sides. So it looks like sine to the power of -1. Okay, but that is not an exponent. All right, this here just means inverse sine. Okay, and on the calculator you may see it as arc sine. Okay, so those are both the same thing. It'll be sine with a small -1 or arc sine. Those both represent the same thing, inverse sine. Okay, so we need to do this to both sides of this equation to get rid of the sine. All right, so we have sine of B, and what I'm going to do is the inverse sine of this right here, sine of B. And I'm doing this to both sides, so I'm also going to do the inverse sine of 0.4848. Okay, so 0.4848. All right. Now on the left side, it's simple. Inverse sine and sine basically cancel each other out, and we can solve for angle B by doing this on the calculator. Okay. Now you want to make sure your calculator is set to degrees. So you need a calculator for this. I'll show you on the Google calculator. All right, so see the DEG right here. You want that in boldface. So I just clicked on it. Make sure it's set to degrees. Okay, and here we have a sine, and INV is inverse. So I'm going to click inverse. And now you can see this says sine with the -1. That's inverse sine. So click inverse sine, and it shows up as arc sine. And in parentheses, I'm going to type 0.4848, close parentheses. All right, arc sine of 0.4848, hit equals. And they said round to the nearest degree. So you just look at the first decimal. If it's 5 or more, you round it up. So 28.9 gets rounded up to 29 degrees. So angle B equals 29 degrees. Okay, they said the nearest degree, so that means no decimal places, just a whole number. All right, and you could write measure of angle B if you like. All right, same thing, but I just abbreviated. Okay, please pause and try number 3. And I'll give you a hint. Instead of doing the inverse sine on both sides, you want to do the inverse cosine on both sides. Otherwise, it's the same thing, so please try it. All right, we have cosine of an angle A. In order to get rid of cosine, we're going to do the inverse cosine on each side. So instead of inverse sine, it's inverse cosine of the cosine of A and that's going to be the inverse cosine of 0.7431. All right, and on the left-hand side, the cosines drop out. And to solve for angle A, we just enter this in the calculator. Once again, make sure you are set to degrees. Okay, so we're going to do inverse cosine 0.7431. Okay, hit clear. Inverse cosine 0.7431. Okay, you can put 0.7431, it's the same thing, and then close parentheses. It equals, okay, and rounding off, we see it's a 0, so you just look at the first decimal place. If it's less than 5, you round it down, so I'm going to keep it as 42 without the decimal. So it's just 42 degrees. Make sure you're set to degrees. All right, so the measure of angle A is just 42 degrees. All right, please pause and try number 6. And again, I'll give you a hint. Instead of inverse sine or inverse cosine, this time you're going to be using inverse tan. So you want to do this to both sides of the equal sign. All right, we have tan of an angle W. And I am going to do the inverse tan of the tan of angle W. And I'm going to do inverse tan of this number right here. 19.0811. All right, on the left-hand side, inverse tan and tan cancel, and we're solving for the angle W. We just do this on the calculator. Okay, inverse tan, 19.0811, and close the parentheses, okay? Inverse tan or arc tan, that's the same thing. Click equals. And rounding off to 1 decimal, we see it's 86.9. The 9 is 5 or more, so this gets rounded up to 87 degrees. So the W, angle W, is going to equal 87 degrees. All right, next section, find the measure of the indicated angle to the nearest degree. Okay, so once again, we will likely have to round off. And for this section, you need to know the trig formulas. Okay, we've covered this before. The way to remember the trig formulas is to use SO, Ka, TOA. All right. The S stands for sine. And you can make that angle use the Greek letter theta. And OH opposite over hypotenuse. All right. The C stands for cosine. And I'm going to use the Greek letter theta to represent the angle measure. A and H stands for adjacent over hypotenuse. And finally, TOA, the T stands for tan, using the Greek letter theta for the angle. And O and A stands for opposite over adjacent. Okay, so you need these formulas. You need these formulas for this exercise. Okay, the only thing is, instead of the Greek letter theta, for their angle, they just used a question mark. All right, so that's how we're going to do these. Now, let's look at number 9. The first thing you want to do is label the sides. Okay, so we're referencing this angle, question mark here. This is our reference angle. We go across from the question mark, and that side is going to be considered the opposite. Okay, abbreviated OPP. Across from the right angle is your hypotenuse, abbreviated HYP. And the remaining side is your adjacent, ADJ. Okay, now you don't have to label all three. You can if it helps you. But we're only going to work with the sides that are given. Okay, so since we don't have the hypotenuse, we're not even going to use it. We're going to use opposite and adjacent. So you need to label the sides, and after that, you want to choose the correct formula. All right. So which one of the three uses opposite and adjacent? Let's see. Well, from the formulas we wrote, the one that uses opposite and adjacent is the tan function. So we're going to use this formula, tan equals opposite over adjacent. All right. So tan of the angle question mark equals opposite over adjacent. All right. So I just wrote the formula for now. And now we're going to plug in. All right. And leave some room on each side because we need to do the inverse on both sides. So leave a little bit of room on the left. All right. I'm going to say tan of the angle question mark. And that's going to equal opposite, which is 27, over adjacent, which is 38. All right. And now, just like we did in the first section, we're going to do the inverse on both sides. All right. So here we have tan. The way to get rid of tan is to do the inverse tan. It looks like tan with a -1. So we're going to do the inverse tan of this whole thing. And we want to do this on both sides. We're going to do the inverse tan of this number as well. All right. On the left-hand side, it cancels. And we're just going to do inverse tan of 27 over 38 on the calculator. Okay, so inverse tan, and they have the parentheses, 27/38, close parentheses, okay? 27 divided by 38 is the same as 27 over 38 in terms of a fraction. Again, make sure DEG is highlighted or bold-faced, and click equals. Okay, they said the nearest degree. If the decimal is less than 5, you round it down. So since it's a 3, this is just going to be 35. All right, so the angle, the question mark, equals 35. And that's in degrees. Okay, like I said, you can label all three sides if you like, but you really only need to label the two sides with the numbers. Okay, please pause and try number 13, and I'll give you a hint. You're going to be using the sine function, or should I say inverse sine function, on this one here. But start by labeling the sides. All right, so look at your angle, the question mark that's being referenced. You go across from that angle to the side, and that side is your opposite. I'll abbreviate OPP. Across from the right angle is your hypotenuse. I'll abbreviate HYP. And this here is adjacent, but we don't have it, so we're not even going to use it. So we want to find the formula that uses opposite and hypotenuse. Okay, we see the formula that uses opposite and hypotenuse is the sine function. So the sine formula is the one we're going to use. All right, so instead of the Greek letter theta, we're just going to be using the question mark. All right, so the sine of the angle question mark equals opposite over hypotenuse. Now again, when you plug in the numbers for the formula, leave some room on each side. We're going to be using the inverse sine. All right, so the sine of the angle question mark is going to equal opposite, which is 10, divided by hypotenuse, which is 39. Okay, and now in order to get rid of sine, we want to do the inverse sine on both sides of this equation. So inverse sine of 10 over 39. Okay, on the left-hand side, the signs cancel. And this we're going to do on the calculator and round to the nearest degree. Inverse sine of 10 divided by 39. Okay, inverse sine of 10 divided by 39, close parentheses, click equals. Okay, look at the decimal. If it's 5 or more, you round it up. So 14.8 becomes 15 degrees. So the question mark is going to equal 15 degrees. Okay, please pause and try number 17. Again, start by labeling the sides, and again, I'll give you a hint. In this case, you're going to be using the inverse cosine function. All right, look at the angle that's being referenced here. You go across from that angle. That side is your opposite. Go across from your right angle to the side, and that side is your hypotenuse. And finally, the remaining side is your adjacent. All right, so we don't have opposite. So we want to find the formula or the function that uses adjacent and hypotenuse. So the formula that uses adjacent and hypotenuse is the cosine function. So we're going to use this formula. All right, the cosine of the angle question mark is going to equal adjacent over hypotenuse. All right, you want to do inverse cosine on both sides to cancel out this cosine. All right, so leave some space as always. So I'm going to do inverse cosine of cosine of question mark all right, on the other side, let me fix this. Well, before I do inverse cosine, let me fill in the numbers here. Okay, cosine of question mark. I'll do it right here. Cosine of question mark equals, and leave some space, adjacent is going to be 6, and hypotenuse is going to be 8. All right. Now to get cosine to cancel, you want to take the inverse cosine of that whole thing. And do this to both sides. So inverse cosine of 6/8. On the left, the cosines drop out. We're left with the question mark. And we're going to do cosine of 6/8 on the calculator. Okay, no need to reduce this. The calculator will do the work. All right, so we're going to do inverse cosine of 6 divided by 8, close parentheses, and click equals. Okay, look at the decimal. If it's less than 5, you round it down. So since it's 0.4, we're going to stick with 41 degrees. So the question mark equals 41 degrees. Now, just one final thought. In the last section, they give you all 3 sides, okay? So you can use any one of the formulas. I recommend using the sine formula. If you're given all 3 sides, I would just use opposite over hypotenuse. Okay? And the reason for that is those are the easiest sides to find. For instance, on this angle right here, if you go across from that angle to the 14, that side is your opposite. And if you go across from the right angle to the side, that side is your hypotenuse. Okay, so I would, if you're given all 3 sides, I would work with those 2 sides and just ignore the 3rd side.